All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 90, part 5, for September 6th, 2026. Frank Fleer goes pink. Before bubble gum was pink, before it snapped in schoolrooms, before it showed up beside baseball cards in wax packs, people already chewed. The human story of gum begins not in a candy factory, but in forests and fields and ancient mouths. Chewing gum is a lot older than bubble gum and sports cards and the corner store pack. The basic habit is simple. Put a tough, springy, natural substance in your mouth, chew it, but don't swallow it. Archaeologists have found ancient chewed birch bark tar with tooth marks preserved, evidence that people in Stone Age Europe were chewing resinous material thousands of years before gum became candy. Different cultures found different things to chew. Ancient Greeks chewed mastic resin from the mastic tree, valued for freshening the breath and cleaning the teeth. Even the word mastication belongs to this old chewing world. It comes through the Latin masticare, to chew, from Greek roots associated with chewing, and from mastice, the resin that Greeks themselves chewed. Indigenous peoples in North America chewed spruce resin. In Mesoamerica, Maya and later Aztec peoples chewed chicle, a latex-like sap from the sapodilla tree. These early gums were not pink, not sugary, not sold with pictures of baseball players. They were natural resins, practical, aromatic, medicinal, social, sometimes just simply pleasurable. Some animals interact with gum-like substances, but not in the human sense of chewing a prepared candy for fun. Certain primates, including marmosets and some lemurs, are known as gumivores because they eat tree gums and saps. They may gnaw bark to release sticky exudate and consume it as food. We do not have a clean count of how many people nervously chew toothpicks or pencils or chew sticks, but the habit belongs to a much larger human pattern, using the mouth to manage attention, anxiety, boredom, or waiting. Animals chew because teeth, food, stress, and curiosity demand it. Humans chew for those reasons too, but then turn the habit into flavor, packaging, manners, memory, and performance. Chewing gum industrialized that impulse. It turned the nervous toothpick, the chewed pencil, and the old resin habit into a packaged, flavored, repeatable consumer product, breath freshener, treat, stress relief, advertising vehicle, and eventually bubble-blowing performance. The first American gum manufacturers came long before the pink bubble. John Curtis in Maine sold spruce gum in the 1840s, literally tree resin turned into a packaged chew. Then paraffin wax gums made gum cleaner, paler, easier to sweeten. Mass-produced wooden toothpicks entered the American market in the 1860s, and by 1869, Charles Forster was selling them by the millions. The real modern turn in gum came with Thomas Adams in New York, who took chicle, the topical tree latex, and made it into a commercial chewing gum in the 1870s. By the time William Wrigley Jr. entered the market at the end of the century, gum had moved from the woods to the factory, from resin to flavor, and from habit to national advertising. And this is the world that Frank Fleer entered. Fleer, a German-born businessman, built his company in Philadelphia in the 1880s. Long before Fleer was a sports card name, it was a gum name. Its early products included flavored chewing gums, candy-coated gums that helped shape what Americans expected gum to be: portable, sweet, inexpensive, and easy to market in small packages. Fleer's advantage, of course, was not that it invented chewing. Nobody did that. Its advantage was Fleer understood packaging, impulse buying, flavor, repetition, and childhood ritual. Gum was the perfect nickel and dime product, cheap enough to buy again, small enough to carry, sensory enough to remember, and flexible enough to attach to jokes, prizes, wrappers, puzzles, and eventually sports cards. Chicle did not simply appear in American candy factories. It came from tropical forests where chicleros climbed and cut sapodilla trees, collected the latex, boiled it down, and moved it through contractors and exporters. Some were independent seasonal workers, but many worked in systems shaped by debt, advances, isolation, and unequal power. So when American gum became cheap, sweet, and modern, part of that modernity rested on difficult forest labor far from the candy counter. A piece of bubble gum began as raw material and ended as a tiny wrapped performance. The gum base, once chicle, later more often a blend of food-grade rubbers, resins, waxes, and softeners, was warmed until pliable, and then worked in large mixers with sugar or other sweeteners, corn syrup, glycerin flavoring, and color until it became a smooth, elastic dough. That warm mass was fed through rollers and extruders, flattened into sheets or pushed into ropes, cooled so that it would hold its shape, and then scored and cut into sticks, chunks, pellets, slabs, or gum balls. Some pieces were dusted or coated. Others went straight to wrapping machines, where paper, foil, comics, labels, and boxes turned the chew into a saleable object. From there it moved through cartons, wholesalers, jobbers, candy counters, vending machines, school pockets, and corner stores. The factory's sticky chemistry becoming a child's penny purchase at the door of everyday life. Now think about the last piece of bubble gum you had. What color was it? I mean, today, pink feels obvious. Who wants to chew gray gum or brown gum? To the 21st century mind, pink means softness, sweetness, femininity, childhood, romance, frosting, breast cancer awareness, Barbie core, or a limited edition marketing campaign. But pink was not always fixed that way. For centuries, it was not one of the great public colors of power like red, purple, black, or gold. Pink was red, softened, floral, fleshy, decorative, intimate, and sometimes luxurious. 18th century Europe, pink could be fashionable, elegant, witty, and aristocratic. Men wore pink coats and waistcoats. Women wore pink gowns. Children wore pink and blue without the strict rules later imposed by mass marketing. Pink was not yet the default color for girls. It was a fashionable color. In fact, this whole pink-blue gender story is surprisingly recent. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, pastel colors became common for babies and children. But pink and blue were not consistently assigned in the way many people assume today. Some stores and style writers even recommended pink for boys because it was considered a stronger, more decisive version of red, while blue could be described as delicate or dainty. Other sources suggested the reverse. The rule was not ancient. The rule was unsettled. This familiar American formula, pink for girls, blue for boys, became far more dominant in the mid-20th century, especially after World War II, as department stores, catalogs, baby clothes, toys, advertising, and television helped sort childhood into color-coded aisles. Even then, pink kept changing. It could be girlish, ironic, glamorous, queer, camp, nostalgic, rebellious, luxurious, or corporate, depending on who was using it and why they were using it. Food gave pink another life. Pink could point to strawberries and raspberries. Watermelon is pink. Grapefruit, salmon, shrimp, ham, rosé wine. But it could also point to fantasy, cotton candy, frosting, candy hearts, strawberry milk, pink lemonade, birthday cake, and eventually bubble gum. In food, pink often tells us before we taste anything that we are entering the world of sweetness, novelty, pleasure, and childhood. You can taste pink. Pink lemonade helped teach Americans that pink could taste like novelty. Its origins are tangled in circus legend. One story says a vendor accidentally used water that was tinted by a red performer tights. Another says red cinnamon candles fell into a batch of lemonade. Neither story is true. It really matters less than the setting. Pink lemonade belonged to fairs and circuses in amusement culture. It did turn an ordinary drink into a spectacle. Now, by the time that Fleer made double bubble pink in 1928, that color was already ready for the candy counter. Fleer did not invent pink food. It made pink portable, chewable, and performative. Before 1928, people chewed gum. After 1928, they blew bubbles. Chewing gum had centuries behind it. Bubble gum required a special texture, elastic enough to stretch, strong enough not to tear immediately, and dry enough not to stick all over the chewer's face. Fleer had chased that idea before. In 1906, Frank H. Fleer experimented with an early bubblegum formula called Blibber Blubber. It could make bubbles, but it was too sticky. It was too brittle. It couldn't sell it as a practical candy. You'd blow a bubble, the bubble would pop, and you'd have a face full of hard-to-remove substance, gummy substance. So the idea was there, but the product was not. Now, gum was not born impolite. People had chewed resins and saps for thousands of years without scandal. The manners problem began when gum became a cheap mass product and moved into schools and theaters and trains and offices and onto the sidewalk. Chewing itself was one thing, but there was snapping and popping and talking through it and sticking the spent wad under a desk. Bubblegum made the conflict sharper because it turned chewing into performance. And by the 20th century, gum could be a treat, a nervous habit, a schoolroom offense, I hope you brought enough for everyone, and a public nuisance all at once. Today, the etiquette rule of gum is mostly situational. Chew quietly and invisibly, or do not chew at all. Frank Fleer became a rich man with his confections. He shocked everyone in July of 1921. When the 60-year-old widower married Ms. Willie Jenkins, a local woman, quote, in her 30s, end quote. Frank's wife had died the year before. But on October 31st, Halloween of 1921, less than 5 months after his remarriage, Frank Fleer died suddenly of apoplexy at his winter home in North Carolina. At the time of his death, his dream of bubblegum had not been realized. He was buried at Laurel Hill West, just a few feet away from the monument for the Shipley sisters. And I have checked many times. I've still never found any bubble gum on the stone of the Shipley sisters, who started their own school for girls. But 1928, here comes the hero, Walter Deemer, 1904-1998, a young accountant at Fleer who liked to experiment with gum recipes, refined Fleer's concept into a workable formula. Deemer's gum stretched better. It held bubbles more reliably, and it was less sticky than Fleer's earlier attempt. The only food coloring available at the plant that day was bright pink. So that became the default color of the first bubble gum, and if you will excuse the pun, it stuck. We could have just as easily been chewing dark green or sky blue bubble gum these days, but those colors would not have become flavors. Pink became an identity. Pink is one of those few colors whose name you can actually taste. Deemer tested the new gum in the simplest way possible. He took wrapped pieces to a local candy store and he sold them for a penny each. They sold out very quickly. And after his first success, he could not recreate the formula for 4 months. But eventually he solved it. He produced a 300-pound batch. Then he taught salesmen how to blow bubbles so they could demonstrate the product. Now, bubblegum was not only food, it was a trick, a performance, and a dare. A child did not simply consume it. A child learned what it could do. Double Bubble became the first commercially successful bubble gum. It was cheap, visual, repeatable, and social. It arrived at the right scale, small enough for a child's pocket and mouth, inexpensive enough for a Depression-era treat, and spectacular enough to advertise itself every time someone blew a bubble. Before that, no one had a reliable commercial reason to walk around blowing gum bubbles. After that, everyone could have a pink wad in their mouth and a tiny performance ready to go. Demer's bubblegum formula was never patented. This allowed competitors to create similar products. Double Bubble brought in $1.5 million in its first year, and the future looked bright for Fleer's pink invention. Bubblegum flavor is a fantasy fruit blend. It's banana, berry, cherry, pineapple, citrus, vanilla, and sometimes wintergreen, all to make that special bubblegum flavor. It's designed to taste bright, sweet, nostalgic, and artificial in a pleasant way. Before the sports cards, there were comics. The early comics on Double Bubble wrappers were large and colorful, with Fleer fortunes and Double Bubble facts alongside the bad jokes. Because the comics were sequentially numbered, children could collect them, even though the wrappers were not dated, and exact release years are hard to pin down. But by the late 1950s and early 1960s, Fleer funnies had shrunk to the small size most people remember, about the size of 2 postage stamps. And a series of more than 1,000 comics, separate comics, have been released over the years. Now, this is Fleer. This is not Bazooka. This is not Bazooka Joe. Now, gumballs and jawbreakers belong to the same candy counter world, but they did different cultural work. The gumball turned gum into a vending machine spectacle, a bright sphere behind glass, released by a coin. It was part chew and part prize. The jawbreaker was not gum at all, but it shared bubblegum's playground logic. It was cheap, colorful, durable, and faintly dangerous, a candy that turned the mouth into a test of patience and bravado. Bubblegum asked, "How big a bubble can you blow?" A jawbreaker asked, "How long can you last?" Together they show how 20th century children's candy became more than sweetness. It became performance, contest, ritual, and dare. World War II interrupted Double Bubble's rise. Sugar and latex shortages halted regular bubblegum manufacturing in 1942, although available supplies still made their way to the military. In 1951, Fleer resumed manufacturing Double Bubble, and the gum's popularity grew steadily. Over time, Fleer added new flavors and formats, expanded distribution overseas, and in 1957 introduced the first gum six-pack with Double Bubble. As gum became a mass habit, city government discovered its less charming afterlife. Not the chew itself, but the discarded wad and wrapper. Sidewalks, theater seats, transit stations, and school desks turned gum into public maintenance problem, prompting anti-litter rules, cleanup campaigns, and local restrictions wherever a penny pleasure became an expensive nuisance. Fleer was a Philadelphia company through and through. Its early factory was in the city, including a Hamilton Street location near today's Parkway area. Later, the company operated at 10th and Diamond, where Double Bubble was born in 1928. And by 1930s, it had moved to Olney, still Philadelphia, not the suburbs. Fleer did not truly leave the city until the mid-1990s, when it shut down the Olney plant and shifted operations out of state. Fleer did not own the idea of bubblegum forever. After all, Diener did not patent it. It owned Double Bubble, the name, the wrapper, the reputation, and the early know-how. But once the public showed there was a market for gum that could blow bubbles, other companies could experiment with their own formulas, avoid Fleer's branding, and sell bubblegum as a category. Fleer created the breakthrough. Competition turned it into an industry. With competition came more advertising campaigns, and comic strip characters seemed a natural fit. Fleer's wrappers first used Dub and Bub, and then developed Pud and his pals. Pud was short for Pudgy. Topps later made the format iconic with Bazooka Joe, while other gum makers experimented with Archie, Tommy Swell, Disney characters, and similar licensed or house-made cartoon figures. Bubblegum comics made a penny purchase feel bigger than candy. The wrapper became a tiny comic page. The character became a familiar friend, and the joke became something a child could carry back to the playground and in the back of his mind for the next 75 years. In that small ritual, children learn the habits of modern youth culture: collecting, trading, brand loyalty, playground humor, and the pleasure of belonging to a world adults only half understood. Topps introduced Bazooka bubblegum in 1947. They wrapped it in patriotic red, white, and blue packaging, and then later added the Bazooka Joe comic strips that turned each piece into a tiny entertainment package. The name Bazooka Joe, it borrowed one of the most explosive words in recent American memory. The bazooka had been a World War II rocket launcher. In 1947, the word still carried a punch of patriotism, along with the novelty and the force. But the term began in comedy and not in combat. Bazoo was old slang for a mouth or noisy talk. And radio comedian Bob Burns used bazooka for a ridiculous homemade horn. During World War II, soldiers looked at the new shoulder-fired rocket tube and thought it resembled Burns' odd instrument. When Topps used the name for bubblegum, it was borrowing a word that had traveled from joke instrument to battlefield weapon to candy counter explosion. 1970s, the category changed again with soft, chunky bubble gums. Bubble Yum helped create the soft bubble gum craze, with a texture that felt easier to chew and better suited to big bubbles. Warner Lambert answered with Bubblicious in 1977. They promoted huge bubbles, bold fruit flavors, and cartoonish television advertising. Wrigley's Hubba Bubba followed soon after, marketed around big bubbles and the promise that the gum was less sticky when bubbles popped. Now, each launch showed the same pattern. Pink was no longer just a color. Gum was no longer just a chew. Bubble gum had indeed become performance, flavor category, wrapper, comic strip, television ad, playground challenge, and a consumer habit built around repeat buying. Bubblegum also turned into competition almost naturally. The first contests were probably informal. Kids on sidewalks, schoolyards, outside candy stores, seeing who could blow the biggest bubble or make the loudest pop, or survive the inevitable pink collapse across the nose and cheeks. Fleer had already treated bubble blowing as a demonstration when Walter Deemer taught salesmen how to blow bubbles for customers, so the product was performative right from the start. 1975, Topps staged the Joe Garagiola Bazooka Big League Bubble Gum Blowing Championship. Major league teams held their own bubble-blowing contests to choose representatives, and the tournament eventually came down to Philadelphia Phillies catcher Johnny Oates against Milwaukee Brewers utility man Kurt Bavacqua. The finale aired before a World Series game, and Bavacqua won. So memorably that Topps put him on a 1976 baseball card as the Bubble Gum Blowing Champion. So Bubblegum's great American moment did not end in 1928. It widened. Through the Depression, World War II, the post-war candy counter, trading cards, comics, vending machines, and the soft gum boom of the 1970s, bubblegum became one of childhood's most visible props. But the material inside the wrapper was changing. The old forest product, chicle from sapodilla trees, could not supply a global habit forever. By the mid-20th century, manufacturers increasingly turned to synthetic gum bases, food-grade rubbers, Did you know there was such a thing as food-grade rubber? Waxes and polymers that were cheaper, more consistent, and easier to scale. In that sense, modern gum became artificial long before consumers thought of it that way. Pink bubble gum looked like childhood, but chemically it belonged in the age of plastics. Bubble gum was mostly a harmless penny pleasure, but not entirely innocent. Sugared gum could feed tooth decay, constant chewing could strain the jaw, discarded wads created a public nuisance long after the flavor was gone. Bubblegum's afterlife was part of the problem. Most modern gum, built on synthetic polymer bases, is not recyclable through ordinary waste systems. So a discarded wad lingers as a sticky litter, unless it's captured by specialized gum recycling programs. And even the old warning about swallowed gum has a small kernel of medical truth. No, gum does not sit in the stomach for 7 years. But rare case reports have described chewing gum bezoars, sticky masses of swallowed gum that obstruct the esophagus, stomach, or intestine, especially in children who repeatedly swallow large quantities. Now, sports cards entered the story because gum companies were already masters of small package desire. Cards began in the late 19th century as product inserts. Tobacco companies used cardboard to stiffen cigarette packs and then realized printed pictures could make these stiffeners collectible. So baseball players, boxers, actors, flags, entertainers all appeared on cards. It turned advertising into a habit. Buy the product, keep the picture, chase the set, chew the gum. By the early 20th century, candy and gum companies had taken over much of that role. A pack of cards was also a pack of gum. A collectible was also a reason to buy candy. Baseball became the first great sports card obsession in America, though it was not the only early sport on cardboard. Hockey developed its own deep tradition, especially in Canada, but baseball most clearly turned cards into a mass-collecting culture in the United States. The change also happened inside the dugout, where baseball had carried a tobacco culture for more than a century. In the 19th century, tobacco companies helped popularize baseball cards by using them as advertising inserts, so the sports collectibles and its chewing habit grew up together. On the field, chewing tobacco became part of baseball's look and rhythm, the bulging cheek, the spit, the slow ritual between pitches, and the belief that a wad in the mouth kept a dry, dusty game bearable. For decades, it seemed nearly inseparable from the national pastime. The link began to weaken slowly. College baseball banned smokeless tobacco in 1990. Minor League Baseball followed in 1993, and Major League Baseball added restrictions over time before the 2016 collective bargaining agreement prohibited new Major League players from using smokeless tobacco during games and team functions. The change was driven by public health warnings, concern over young fans seeing the habit modeled on television, local tobacco-free stadium laws, and the deaths or illnesses of prominent baseball figures associated in public memory with smokeless tobacco. Two names made that danger visible. Bill Tuttle, an 11-year Major League outfielder for the Detroit Tigers, Kansas City Athletics, and Minnesota Twins, developed oral cancer after decades of chewing tobacco. After surgery that cost him much of his jaw and cheek, he spent his final years warning players and children about spit tobacco before he died in 1998. And Tony Gwynn, the Hall of Fame San Diego Padres hitter, died in 2014 of salivary gland cancer. Gwynn believed the disease was linked to the smokeless tobacco he had long kept in his right cheek, and his death became one of the most widely cited examples in baseball's turn away from tobacco. Bubblegum offered an almost perfect substitute because it kept the gesture while changing the meaning. Big League Chew made the substitution literal. Introduced in 1980 by former pitcher Rob Nelson with help from former Major Leaguer Jim Bouton, It came shredded in a foil pouch that deliberately resembled chewing tobacco, giving players and children the ritual without the leaf. So baseball did not stop chewing. It changed what it chewed. The old wad of tobacco became a wad of pink gum, and the spit-stained habit turned into bubbles, wrappers, flavors, and performance. At one time or another, every rookie is submitted to the same initiation rite of having an inflated clump of bubble gum writing on his baseball cap near the squatchy. Fleer was producing baseball-related cards as early as 1923 and included a multi-subject issue that featured athletes and entertainers. The cards were not yet the engine of the modern hobby, but they showed Fleer experimenting with the formula that would define the industry: personalities, packaging, and collectability. Fleer's later sports card story grows out of the gum story. In 1959, Fleer issued a Ted Williams baseball set that built an entire release around one superstar. In the 1970s and early 80s, Fleer challenged Topps' dominance and helped open the baseball card market to broader competition. By the 1980s, Fleer, Donruss, and Topps formed the three-brand landscape many collectors remember. And then there is basketball. Fleer's 1961 basketball set became a pillar of vintage basketball collecting, with early cards of legends such as Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Bill Russell, and Bob Cousy. After years, when basketball cards appeared only unevenly, Fleer returned in 1986 with one of the most famous sets in sports card history, 1986-87 Fleer basketball. It was small, 132 base cards plus stickers, but it carried a generation of stars and rookies. Michael Jordan's card number 57 became the modern hobby's signature basketball card, joined by rookies of Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, Hakeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, Dominique Wilkins, Isaiah Thomas, Chris Mullins, Joe Dumars, and James Worthy. Cards and gum shared the same emotional machine: a small purchase, a bright wrapper, the promise of surprise, the chase for a complete set, and the hope that this pack might contain the one thing that everybody wanted, and then the later hope that eventually your mother will not throw them all out. Fleer was part confectioner, part publisher, part toy maker, and part memory factory. So the Fleer story is not only a sports card story. It is a story about an ancient human habit that becomes a modern product, about a color that moved from aristocratic fashion to candy counters and childhood memory, and about a Philadelphia factory where one pink batch changed what gum could do, and where the neighborhood smelled like bubble gum. Before 1928, people chewed. After 1928, people performed. They stretched gum across their lips, filled it with air, snapped it, popped it, competed with it, chomped on it, and carried its color in their mouths. And from that same world of wrappers, pennies, children, counters, and repeat purchases came the sports card culture that Fleer later helped define. Frank Fleer did not invent chewing. Frank Fleer did not invent pink food. And Frank Fleer did not invent sports card collecting. In fact, Frank Fleer did not invent the bubble gum that we know today. But in 1928, his company brought all of those worlds together in a way that stuck. Sweet, elastic, bright, pink. Unmistakably pink.
Heavy and cry.